Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unsaid Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. My friend and I were driving through the back roads of a small country town, the kind of place where everything looks the same once the sun goes down. Fields on both sides, fences that run for miles, the occasional mailbox leaning at an angle like it's tired of standing. If you've ever lived down south in one of those quiet little towns people call country without thinking, you know the feeling. The roads are mostly dirt or gravel, barely wide enough for two cars to pass without slowing down. At night, they turn into black tunnels cut through open land, and your headlights feel like the only light in the world. Those roads were where teenagers went when they wanted to be away from adults. Nobody cared if you sat out there for an hour with your music low, smoking, talking, doing whatever you couldn't do in someone's driveway. There were no cops cruising around. There weren't even many houses once you got a few miles out. Just sky, fields, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the only person awake. It was late. Not midnight late. Later than that. The kind of late where even your own voice sounds too loud inside a car. The cold had settled in. Not the sharp cold of winter, but the damp cold that hugs the ground and creeps through cracks. The air outside the windows looked thicker in the headlights, full of dust and tiny insects and mist you couldn't name. My friend was driving. He'd been in one of those moods where he thought he was invincible. He was messing with his one-hitter, trying to pack it while steering with the other hand, laughing at his own jokes. I remember telling him to slow down. I remember saying his name more than once. That irritated tone you use when you're trying to sound calm, but you're actually nervous. "Dude, chill," I said. "Watch the road." He gave me that half smile people give when they're pretending they hear you, but they don't want to admit you're right. He let off the gas for maybe 2 seconds and then sped back up like he couldn't help himself. We came around a tight curve, one of those bends that sneaks up on you because the road isn't marked well, and everything outside your headlights is just black. Gravel popped under the tires. The car leaned slightly as we rounded it. And then, out of nowhere, a black lab ran into the road. There was no warning, no barking, no movement in the field before it. Just a dog, full speed, straight into the beam of our headlights like it had been chased out of the dark. My friend didn't have time to brake. He didn't have time to swerve without risking flipping the car. The dog was right there, so close it felt unreal. The impact hit with a heavy, dull thud that went through the front end and into my bones. The hood dipped. The car jolted. My stomach dropped as if the road disappeared for a second. I felt the body roll under us, but not the way you'd expect. It went under the car between the wheels, not under the tires. I felt it pass beneath the center like something sliding under a door. For a second, there was only the sound of gravel and wind and my friend's sharp inhale. Then he slammed on the brakes so hard the tires skidded and the car fishtailed slightly, dust flying up behind us. He threw it into park, and before I could even say anything, he'd already flung his door open and jumped out. "Fuck," he said, voice high and tight. "Fuck, fuck." I got out on my side, too. The night air hit my face, cold and dirty with dust. My heart was pounding so hard, it made my hands shake. Neither of us spoke like normal people because normal words didn't fit what we'd just done. My first instinct was to check under the car. I dropped to my knees on the gravel, ignoring how sharp the stones felt against my jeans. I leaned down and looked beneath the chassis, expecting to see fur, legs, a shape, blood, something. There was nothing. No dog, no shadow, no movement. Just empty darkness and gravel and the underside of the car. I shifted and looked again. convinced I must have missed it. My friend was circling the front end with his phone light on, muttering, breathing fast. Still nothing. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt off my hands, my mind lagging behind the moment like it couldn't catch up. The silence of the road made the whole thing feel even stranger. If we'd hit a dog, there should have been something. A whine, a scrape, a body, anything. My friend said my name, not casually, not like he was calling me over to help. His voice cracked. It came out thin and scared, the most frightened sound I had ever heard from him. I looked over the roof of the car toward him. There was a man standing beside him. He wasn't a farmer out checking fences. He wasn't someone who looked like he'd stepped out of a nearby house. He looked like he belonged to the ditch, filthy, covered in dirt, clothes hanging off him like rags, long hair stuck together in strands. His face looked weathered and hollow, like he'd been outside for a long time, sleeping wherever he could. The kind of person you might see near a highway underpass, not out here in the middle of fields at 2 a.m. He stood between my friend and the open driver's door, close enough that my friend couldn't get back into the car without brushing past him. My friend didn't move. He held his hands slightly raised, like his body had decided that stillness might keep him safe. I froze too. My mind didn't go to anything supernatural. It went straight to danger. It went to all the things adults warn you about, but that you don't believe will ever happen to you. A stranger at night, a deserted road, no one around, no cell service maybe, a bad situation with no easy help. I forced myself to speak because silence felt worse. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding wrong in the open air. We accidentally hit a dog." The man turned his head slowly and looked at me. And that look is the part that stayed with me. More than the dog, more than the cop lights later. That look, it wasn't curiosity, it wasn't anger, it wasn't even the blank stare of someone high or confused. It was focused, cold, like he was looking through my skin, like he wasn't seeing my face at all, but something behind it, something private I couldn't hide. His eyes didn't widen, his mouth didn't change. He didn't ask what happened, he didn't ask for help. He didn't even glance toward the front of the car like a normal person would if they heard you say you hit a dog. He just stared. My skin crawled. I felt the hair on the back of my neck lift. Something in me recognized that this man didn't fit the moment. He didn't fit the place. He didn't fit any normal human reaction. My friend swallowed hard and whispered my name again, like he wanted me to stop talking, like he wanted me to understand that whatever this was, we needed to leave. The man didn't answer. He didn't move toward us. He didn't step back. He simply turned his body slow and smooth and began walking past my friend into the darkness. Not running, not limping, not stumbling like someone drunk. Just walking, but like he had all the time in the world. Like he'd stepped out of the night only to make sure we saw him, and now he was satisfied. My friend didn't wait for him to get far. The moment the man's shoulder cleared the door, my friend jumped into the driver's seat like it was a lifeboat. I ran around the front end, got in on my side, slammed the door, and locked it so hard the sound echoed inside the car. We were both breathing like we'd been running. "What the fuck was that?" my friend said, a voice shaking. "Where did he come from?" I said, and it came out almost as a whisper. We kept repeating the same questions because our brains needed something to do besides panic. I looked out the windows expecting to see the man standing there again in the headlights, smiling or reaching for the door handle. But the darkness swallowed him immediately. The man disappeared as if the road had eaten him. My friend threw the car into drive and hit the gas. Gravel sprayed. The car jolted forward. He drove too fast, hands rigid on the wheel, cutting corners, not caring about the curve we'd almost wrecked on 5 minutes earlier. I kept turning my head, scanning the road, scanning the fields, scanning the rearview mirror. Every fence post that flashed in the headlights made me flinch. Every dark shape at the edge of the beam made my stomach tighten. We didn't talk about the dog anymore. We didn't talk about going back to check. The dog had become the smallest part of the night, which should tell you how wrong everything felt. Finally, we reached the main highway. The asphalt felt smoother under the tires, like the car itself relaxed a tiny bit. My friend pulled out too quickly, tires squealing. He was still driving like someone being chased, and in my head, we were. Then red and blue lights exploded behind us. For a second, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The flashing filled the inside of the car, reflected in the mirrors bouncing off the windshield. My stomach dropped all over again, but this time with a different kind of fear. A real-world fear. The kind that gets you in trouble. The kind you can't outrun. A cop, my friend whispered, like saying it quietly might make it go away. We pulled over. The officer walked up with his flashlight, shining it through the windows in quick, practiced movements. The beam was bright enough to make my eyes water. It swept across our faces. The dashboard, the seats, the floorboard. "What's the matter, boys?" he asked. His voice was calm, even slightly annoyed. "You were driving a bit erratic back there. You boys been drinking?" We tried to answer, but we were talking too fast, tripping over words. My friend said, "No, sir, we hit a dog back there and we got freaked out." The officer didn't look convinced. He leaned closer, shined the light into my friend's eyes, then mine. He was searching for the usual signs. Alcohol, a panic that didn't match the story, smoke, lies. Then his flashlight beam moved to the back seat. He paused. "You mean that dog?" he said. My friend and I both turned at the same time. Lying across the back seat was a dead black lab. It wasn't crammed in like it had been thrown. It was laid out neatly, stretched along the seat as if someone had placed it there carefully. There was no blood, no obvious trauma, no dirt smeared into the upholstery, no broken glass, no ripped fabric. Nothing that suggested an animal had been dragged into the car in a hurry. It was just there. My throat locked up. My body went cold in a way that made my fingertips tingle. I couldn't speak. I couldn't blink. My mind tried to count steps like math could save me. We hadn't opened the back doors. We hadn't touched the dog. We had checked under the car. There had been nothing. Yet the dog was lying across the back seat like it had ridden there the whole time. My friend made a small sound, like he was about to throw up. His face drained of color. He stared at the dog with the kind of disbelief that becomes horror when it doesn't go away after a second. The officer didn't understand our reaction. To him, this probably looked like dumb kids who hit a dog and then panicked. Maybe he thought we had thrown it in the back seat out of guilt. Maybe he thought we were lying about not drinking and the dog was part of some stupid story. He shined his flashlight closer, checking for blood, checking for signs we'd been doing something worse than we admitted. He asked questions, but I barely heard them over the roar of my heartbeat. All I could see was the dog's black fur in the back seat and the shape of it in the strobing light. I kept expecting it to twitch. I kept expecting its chest to rise. I kept expecting anything that would make the world normal again. Nothing happened. The officer finally stepped back, still wary, still suspicious, but his focus shifted from supernatural impossibility to teenage stupidity. He told us to slow down. He told us to get home. He warned my friend about reckless driving. I don't remember exactly what he said because my brain was stuck on one thing. The dog had moved without moving. We drove away carefully after that, not because we suddenly became responsible, but because the fear was now in every inch of the car. The dog was behind us, a silent proof that something had happened that we couldn't explain. The smell of the car felt different. The air felt thinner. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I expected to see that filthy man again, walking in the middle of the highway as if he owned it. But the road stayed empty. We didn't go back. We didn't tell anyone the whole story, not in a way that made sense. Who would believe it? Two teenagers out on back roads, maybe a little high, hitting a dog, seeing a strange man, then getting pulled over with the dog in the back seat like it climbed in by itself. It sounded like a lie you'd tell to cover something worse, but I know what we saw, and to this day, the part that makes my stomach turn isn't the dead dog. It's the man's stare, that look that didn't match the situation, that cold, fixed focus, like he already knew exactly how the night was going to end, like he had stepped out of the dark only to mark us, only to make sure we understood. We weren't alone out there, even in an empty town, even on a silent road. And when I think back on it, the worst thought isn't even, how did the dog get in the car? It's this. We didn't see where the man came from. We didn't see where he went. And for a few minutes on that road, with our doors unlocked and our panic loud inside the car, there was nothing stopping him from being closer than we ever realized. One of the creepiest stories I have ever read came from a man who used the online name Black Fedora. I do not know his real name, and I never tried to find out. Sometimes it is better that way. The story was about the American Midwest, about getting lost on a road that should have led somewhere, and about discovering something that should have stayed buried beneath the earth. I grew up in a city where the nights never truly go dark. There are always streetlights, traffic, noise, people. The horizon is broken by buildings and the sky is cut into pieces by power lines and rooftops. Driving through the Midwest felt like entering a different world entirely. It was not just quieter, it was wider, emptier. The sky stretched so far that it made me uneasy, like I was too small for it. Anyone who has driven through the breadbasket of America knows what I mean. It is all about the fields. Billions of acres of crops spread across the land like a massive green blanket, corn mostly, and endless rows of it, planted in perfect lines that run straight as rulers. From a distance, when the wind moves through it, the leaves ripple like water. It looks peaceful, organized, safe. But when you are alone out there, it does not feel peaceful. It feels watched. The strangest part is how endless it seems. The cornfields go on for hours and hours. You might pass a farmhouse sitting back from the road, its paint peeling. You might see a lonely windmill turning slowly against the sky. A rusted barn collapsing into itself. But often there is nothing at all. No people, no movement, just the crop and the sky. It gives you the strange feeling that some great civilization once built all of this and then vanished, leaving only their work behind, as if the people who planted these fields simply stepped away one day and never came back. That was the landscape I was driving through on the last evening of July. I had been on the road for days, crossing state lines, but eating at gas stations, sleeping in short bursts at rest stops. I was tired in a way that sinks into your bones, the kind of tired that makes your thoughts slow and heavy. The sun was beginning to sink, turning the sky a deep orange. I had one more stretch to go before I reached the interstate, or at least that was what I believed. At a small gas station about 15 miles back, I had asked for directions. The man behind the counter, a heavy-set guy with tired eyes, told me I could take a gravel road that would cut several miles off my trip. Worn but passable, he had said. A shortcut. At that point, a shortcut sounded like a gift. So instead of staying on the main paved highway, I turned onto the gravel road. At first, it was fine. Narrow, yes, but manageable. The gravel crunched under my tires. Cornfields rose up on either side of me, tall and close, forming a green tunnel. A few miles in, the road began to change. The gravel thinned out, giving way to packed dirt. Then the dirt broke into two shallow ruts with weeds growing between them. The corn leaned closer. The weeds began scraping against the underside of my red sedan. I considered turning around. I really did. I even slowed the car to think about it. But stubbornness is a powerful thing. I had already driven this far. It would be ridiculous to backtrack now. Surely it would reconnect with something better just ahead. The sky darkened as I pushed forward. The weeds grew thicker. The ruts deepened. My car bounced and shook, the suspension complaining. Then, without warning, the path simply ended. I stopped the car and stared ahead. There was no curve, no sign, no intersection, just corn. The faint outline of tire tracks vanished into tall stalks. It did not even look like a dead end. It looked like a mistake, like a road that someone had begun carving and then abandoned halfway through. I gripped the steering wheel and swore under my breath. I felt foolish, angry. The thought of reversing all the way back down that narrow path in the dark made my head throb. I shifted into reverse, ready to back out. That was when I heard it. At first, it was faint, a low rumble. Then it grew louder, a rhythmic engine roar, deep and steady. I knew that sound. Anyone who has ever stood near a highway knows it. It was a motorcycle, not a small one, a Harley Davidson by the sound of it. The engine tore through the air, strong and confident. It was close, very close. The interstate had to be just beyond the corn, a few hundred yards at most. I imagined the road on the other side, bright lines painted on asphalt, open lanes, civilization. The engine sound continued steady and clear, not fading, not distant. I sat there, heart pounding. I knew what I was about to do was wrong. I knew I would be damaging someone's crop. But the thought of reversing miles in the dark felt worse. I told myself it would only be a small stretch, just enough to break through. I shifted into drive. The first impact was violent. Corn stalks slapped against the hood and windshield. The sound was explosive, like heavy rain on metal. The car lurched forward, forcing its way through thick green resistance. The stalks bent, snapped, and disappeared under the bumper. It was nothing like in the movies. It was loud, rough. My car shook and groaned, but it kept moving for what felt like several long minutes. I drove blindly through the wall of corn. Then suddenly, the resistance vanished. I burst out into open space and slammed on the brakes. I laughed once, a sharp sound of relief. Then I stopped laughing. I was on a road, but it was not the interstate. It was a perfectly paved two-lane black road, smooth, flawless. It stretched in a straight line in both directions, disappearing into the dim evening light. There were no road signs, no painted lines, no shoulder. Just asphalt cutting through endless corn. There were no headlights in the distance, no traffic sounds, and the motorcycle engine was gone. I turned off the engine and listened. Nothing. The silence was so complete that it felt heavy. Slowly, I turned in my seat and looked back at the cornfield I had just driven through. There was no opening, no broken stalks, no crushed path, no sign that anything had disturbed it. The wall of corn stood solid and untouched, row after perfect row. For a long moment, I could not breathe. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It was impossible. Corn does not heal itself in seconds. I got out of the car and walked toward the edge of the field. I reached out and touched the nearest stalk. It was firm, unbroken. The soil beneath it showed no tire marks. I walked a few steps along the edge, searching for the gap I knew I had made. There was none. The realization came slowly, like cold water seeping into my shoes. Well, I was not where I thought I was. I got back into the car and locked the doors. Left or right, that was all I had. I chose what I believed was south and began to drive. Miles passed. The scenery never changed. Cornfields pressed in on both sides, their tops whispering in the wind. There were no mailboxes, no farmhouses, no power lines. I turned on the radio. Only static answered me. But beneath the static, I thought I heard something else. A faint pattern, like breath. Like distant voices too low to understand. I turned it off. The gas needle began to drop. I watched it more than the road. I stopped several times, rolling down the window to listen for traffic, for wind, for anything. Crickets chirped at first, then even they grew quiet. The sky darkened fully. The moon rose round and pale, draining color from the world. Everything turned gray and black. My low fuel light flickered on. Panic settled in my chest. Then, in the distance, I saw a shape breaking the flat horizon. A barn. It rose out of the fields like a ship at sea. Tall, dark, solid. Relief hit me so hard that my hands shook on the steering wheel. I turned into a short paved driveway that sloped gently upward. I parked at the bottom of the hill and shut off the engine. The silence returned immediately. The barn looked ancient. Its wooden boards were black with age. The structure was tall and steep, with heavy oak doors at the front. It did not look abandoned exactly. It looked preserved, as if time had touched it but not claimed it. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed the grass. Around the barn, for about 50 yards in every direction, the grass was perfectly cut, smooth, even, like a golf course. Beyond that neat circle, the corn resumed. Someone maintained this place, but there were no lights in the windows, no vehicles, no signs of life. The path leading up to the doors was hard-packed and smooth, not gravel, not dirt. It looked polished by something heavy traveling over it again and again. I walked up and knocked. The sound echoed hollowly inside. "Hello," I called. "I'm lost. I'm almost out of gas." No answer. I waited longer than I needed to, long enough for doubt to grow heavy. Finally, I grabbed the iron ring handle and pulled. The doors opened with a slow, deep creak. Inside, the air was stale and dry. Dust hung in the moonlight pouring through the doorway. The interior was vast and mostly empty. The wooden beams overhead disappeared into shadow. I stepped inside. My footsteps echoed. In the center of the floor was something that did not belong. An iron trapdoor. It was large and circular, set into the wooden boards. It looked industrial, old but solid. There was a ring handle in the center. A faint smell drifted up from it. Damp earth. And something metallic. Sweet. I should have left. Instead, I knelt and pulled the ring. The trapdoor opened smoothly, as if it had been used recently. Stone steps spiraled downward into darkness. I turned on my phone's flashlight and began to descend. The air grew colder with each step. The sounds from above faded until there was nothing but the faint hum of my own breathing. At the bottom was a corridor. Doors lined both sides. The walls were wood, old and worn. The floor was stone. I opened the first door on my left. Inside was a bedroom, decorated like something from the 1950s, a bed, a lamp, a dresser, everything coated in thick dust. On the nightstand sat a glass with a faint ring at the bottom where water had once been. I closed it and opened the next. Another bedroom, different style, older, a wash basin in the corner, a small iron bed, room after room, each one furnished for a different era. A pioneer cabin, a Victorian chamber, a mid-century guest room. It was like walking through time. A museum of places where someone had once slept. At the end of the corridor was a door that did not match the others. It was new, fresh wood, shiny brass handle. I opened it. Inside was a clean room, no dust. The bed was neatly made. A lamp glowed warmly on the bedside table. On a plate beside it sat a meal. Steak, potatoes, corn, steam rising gently. Beside the plate lay a note. My hand shook as I picked it up. "For the guest who found the way," it read. Eat, rest. You have a long journey ahead. A sound echoed behind me. Heavy footsteps, slow, measured, coming down the stone stairs. Thud, thud, thud. Each step carried weight, enough to shake faint dust from the ceiling, the same weight that had smoothed the path outside. The footsteps reached the bottom. I heard breathing, deep, steady. They moved into the corridor. I backed into the corner of the room, my mind finally understanding what my body had known from the moment the corn closed behind me. The road had not been a mistake. It had been an invitation. The footsteps stopped outside the open door. A shadow fell across the threshold. It was tall, broad, not quite human in shape. A voice filled the hallway, low and resonant like stone grinding against stone. "Welcome," it said calmly. "We have been waiting." I tried to scream, but the sound felt swallowed by the earth itself. Far above, the cornfields stretched endlessly beneath the moon, their leaves whispering softly in the wind. The road remained smooth and empty. The grass around the barn stayed perfectly trimmed. And somewhere, miles away, at a small gas station under flickering fluorescent lights, a man with tired eyes gave directions to another traveler looking for a shortcut. There's a kind of fear that doesn't hit you like a jump scare. It settles. It sinks into you slowly, like cold water finding the lowest point in your body. It's the fear you get when you realize you're home, the place where you eat, sleep, and walk around half-dressed without thinking, has been shared with someone you didn't invite, not robbed, not broken into for 10 minutes while you were out. Shared, lived in, used, like your life was a room they could step into whenever they felt like it. People talk about home invasions like they're loud, like glass shatters and alarms scream and someone kicks the door in, but sometimes it starts the opposite way. It starts with silence, with tiny things that don't add up, a feeling you can't prove, the kind of feeling you argue with because admitting it would mean admitting you're not safe. These are two separate incidents, two different families, two different places. The details aren't identical, but the fear is. And both stories begin with the same lie we all want to believe. If the doors are locked, we are alone. The first family lived the kind of life you'd expect in a quiet suburb. The husband worked a steady job. The wife kept the house tidy. Their 2 kids had school, sports, friends, routines. Nothing dramatic, nothing that made them feel like they were living with danger. They weren't careless people either. They locked the doors. They had the kind of healthy paranoia that most suburban parents have. Nothing extreme, just the normal stuff. Don't leave the garage open. Don't leave windows unlocked. Don't post vacation plans online. That's why the first signs didn't feel like signs at all. They felt like human error. It started with the kitchen. The wife was the kind of person who did a quick reset every morning. Coffee mugs rinsed, dishes stacked, dishwasher loaded, counters wiped. She liked coming home to a clean space. And she liked leaving the house feeling like she had control over the day. She would stand in the kitchen with her keys in her hand, taking that last look around, lights off, sink clear, chairs pushed in, before shouting goodbye to the kids and heading out. Then, once or twice a week, they'd come home and something would be off. At first, it was small. A drinking glass on the counter with a little water still in it. Not a full glass, not something that looked like it had been left from breakfast, but something fresh, like someone had poured it recently and took a sip, then set it down and forgot. Another day, it was a plate on the dining table with crumbs on it. Another day, it was a chair pulled back slightly, like someone had sat there for a moment and gotten up. There were a few times the trash can lid was open when she was sure she'd closed it. A few times a cabinet door didn't sit right, like it hadn't been shut all the way. None of it was big enough to make a report about. None of it came with the clear logic of a forced entry. In a family house, things move. Kids forget to clean up. People leave cups around. Time blurs. You do 1,000 small actions a day and don't remember every one of them. That's what made it so poisonous. It wasn't dramatic enough to take seriously, but it was consistent enough to slowly ruin their peace. The husband assumed it was the kids. The wife assumed it was herself. They started having those small, yet tired arguments that aren't really about the glass or the crumbs. They were about feeling unheard, about feeling like you're carrying too much, about thinking your partner is careless or accusing you of being careless. The husband would come home and see a plate on the table and say, a little too sharply, "Really? You couldn't just put that in the sink?" And she would stare at it, stomach turning, because she knew she hadn't eaten anything on that plate. She would say, "That wasn't me." He would roll his eyes like he didn't want to fight but couldn't help it. "Okay, so the plate walked itself out." She would feel her face get hot. "I'm serious, I didn't do that." And then you could hear it in the silence after, the tiny crack of doubt. Not doubt that the other person was lying, doubt that something was wrong with your own mind. The kids denied it too, but kids deny everything. They deny it even when there's evidence on their hands. And the family's life was busy enough that nobody wanted to turn dinner into an investigation. Then the food started going faster than it should have. The milk carton would be lower than expected. Bread would disappear at a weird pace. A box of cereal would be noticeably lighter even though the kids swore they hadn't eaten it. Snacks vanished. One time the wife bought a pack of granola bars, and a few days later there were only 2 left. She assumed the kids had taken them to school. The kids swore they hadn't. The husband suggested maybe she miscounted. She knew she hadn't. She started doing little mental tricks to test herself. She would set items in specific positions in the pantry. She would make sure the cereal box label faced outward. She would leave a note in her own head. The peanut butter jar is half full. The chips are unopened. The bread has 8 slices left. And then she'd come home and see the cereal box turned sideways, or the bread bag twisted differently, or the peanut butter scraped lower than it should be. She didn't want to be the kind of person who panics. She didn't want to be dramatic. She didn't want to scare the kids. So she told herself it was nothing. She told herself the house was old. She told herself they were forgetful because life was fast. But the feeling in the house changed anyway. A low-level tension settled in, like static. Not obvious, but always there. The wife stopped enjoying the quiet moments when she was home alone. She began checking the rooms without knowing she was doing it, walking a little farther down the hallway than necessary, listening longer than she used to. She started locking the bathroom door when she showered, something she never did before. She couldn't explain it without sounding ridiculous, so she kept it to herself. Then came the afternoon that ripped the whole thing open. It was a weekday. The husband and wife both got off work early for errands. Nothing special. They were in the car, talking about dinner, maybe even laughing a little because the day felt lighter than usual. They pulled into the driveway and the wife noticed something that didn't belong. A haze hung in the air near the garage door. At first, she thought it was exhaust from a neighbor's car or steam from a vent. But it didn't drift like steam. It rolled. It thickened. Gray and sluggish, it looked like it was leaking out from the bottom seam of the garage door, curling along the concrete. Smoke. The word hit them at the same time, and the husband's face changed instantly. He didn't even park properly. He stopped the car hard, yanked the visor down, hit the garage door opener button without thinking. The door began to lift. As soon as it moved, the smoke poured out heavier and the smell hit them. Burning, chemical, wrong. The kind of smell that doesn't just say fire, but says something is being destroyed on purpose. The husband got out, ready to run inside. Ready to fight a fire the way people always imagined they would. He took 2 steps and then stopped so suddenly it looked like he'd hit an invisible wall. There was a man inside the garage. Not a neighbor, not a firefighter, not someone panicking about an accident. A stranger, dirty, clothes hanging loose, face streaked with soot. In one hand he held a gasoline can, and in the other he held a lighter. He wasn't staring at the smoke like he'd made a mistake. He was watching it the way you watch something you meant to happen. Then the man looked up and saw the garage door opening. For a split second, the world felt too still. 3 people locked in a tableau. The husband in the driveway, the wife in the car, the stranger in the garage. The kind of moment that doesn't feel real until it's too late. The man's eyes met the husband's, and there was no surprise in them. Only anger, like the husband had interrupted something sacred. The husband shouted for his wife to lock the car and call the police. His voice cracked in a way the wife would never forget. He smashed the garage button again, trying to make the door go back down, trying to create a barrier, trying to trap the man inside the garage, or at least keep him from rushing out. The door started lowering. The husband backed away. He didn't know if the man would run. He didn't know if the man had a weapon. He only knew there was a predator in his house, and his family was right there, exposed. He ran to the neighbor's door and pounded on it like he was trying to break it down. He shouted for help. He shouted for someone to call 911 again in case his wife couldn't. He shouted so loud people started opening their curtains. Sirens arrived quickly. Police cars pulled up hard. Officers poured out with weapons drawn, barking commands that sounded both unreal and painfully official. The man was arrested before the fire spread beyond the garage, and firefighters knocked down the smoke and heat before the house went up. The family stood across the street in the cold, watching strangers swarm their property. The kids cried. The wife clutched them so tight it hurt. The husband kept staring at the garage door like he expected it to lift again and reveal that man's face. When the smoke cleared, the investigation began. The police asked the obvious questions. How did he get in? Did you know him? Is there anyone who has a grudge? The family didn't have answers. They kept repeating the same thing. We lock our doors. That's when the officers went through the house carefully. Not just the garage, the attic access, the crawl spaces, the basement if there was one. Every place a person could hide. And they found it. Up in the attic, tucked between insulation, there was a space that didn't look like storage. It looked like a nest, a sleeping bag, or a couple of dirty blankets, a pile of food wrappers, empty snack bags, crushed bread ties, discarded cartons, a plastic bottle that smelled like urine, a small flashlight, a cheap phone charger, and a notebook. The notebook was the part that made the wife feel physically ill because it wasn't random scribbles. It was information, their information, names, dates of birth, the kids' schools, the husband's workplace, the wife's workplace, notes about when the house was empty, notes about when the kids went to bed, notes about the wife's routines, the exact time she left in the morning, the time the husband got home, which windows were easiest to see into. There were lists of passwords, bank details, social security numbers. Not all of it was correct, but enough of it was that the meaning was unmistakable. He'd been listening, watching, learning their life from above, like a parasite. When the detective explained what they believed had been planned, the husband didn't argue, he didn't deny it. He just stared at the notebook like he was reading his own death certificate. The detective said it bluntly. Based on what they found, based on the gasoline, the lighter, the planning, they believed the man was going to kill the family that night, then burn the house to destroy evidence, then disappear with whatever money and identity information he could use. The wife heard that and made a small sound that wasn't a cry, wasn't a scream, just a broken exhale. The idea that she'd been making lunches and folding laundry while someone studied her children's sleep schedule from above felt like madness. The idea that she'd doubted her own memory over dirty dishes while a stranger used her kitchen made her want to throw up. All those arguments about plates and glasses suddenly turned into something else, a warning they almost missed, a whisper from reality that had been trying to get their attention. They moved out, of course. People always say that after something like that, but it's true. They couldn't stay. The house might have been cleaned, repaired, blessed, repainted. It wouldn't matter. They couldn't stand under that attic ever again without imagining weight shifting above them. And even in their new home, the habits stayed. The wife still did a kitchen check before leaving, but now she did it with dread. The husband woke up at night to phantom creaks. The kids became kids who asked to sleep with the door open, the light on, the closet checked twice. Because the worst part wasn't the man in the garage with the gasoline can. The worst part was the months before, when he was there and they didn't know. The second story doesn't have a dramatic garage door moment. It doesn't have smoke pouring into daylight. In some ways it's worse because it shows how easily we dismiss the only warnings we get. This one involved a father and his young son. A normal house. A busy parent trying to do the best he could. A kid with the kind of imagination kids always have. When the boy first mentioned the clown, the father didn't take it seriously. Why would he? Kids talk about monsters. Kids fear shadows. Kids have dreams that spill into waking life. Parents learn quickly which fears are phases and which ones are real. Most of the time, they're phases. The boy said it in an ordinary way at first. Like he was describing something that had simply happened. Over breakfast, he looked tired, pushing cereal around his bowl with the spoon like he wasn't hungry. The father asked if he slept okay. The boy said very plainly that he didn't because the clown was watching him. The father smiled, the kind of tired smile parents use to make fear smaller. He told him clowns weren't real in their house. He asked if the boy had a bad dream. He said it was probably a shadow. He promised to check the room that night. The next morning, the boy said it again. The clown was in the corner. The father started doing the routine. He'd check under the bed. He'd open the closet door wide, showing hangers and old toys and nothing else. He'd pull back the curtains. He'd flick on the light, walk around the room and make a little show of it. He wanted his son to see that adults weren't scared. The boy watched him closely, but he didn't relax. He never described the clown as moving or talking. That almost made it easier for the father to dismiss, because the story didn't evolve like a real threat. The boy just kept saying the same thing. It stands there. It watches me. Sometimes the boy would add little details that made the father's skin prickle, even though he tried not to show it. He'd say the clown's head was tilted like it was curious. He'd say the clown didn't blink. He'd say it felt like the clown was smiling under its mask, even when you couldn't see its mouth. The father told himself it was his son's brain trying to give shape to darkness. He told himself his son had seen something on TV or heard something at school. He tried to handle it the right way, calm, reassuring, firm but gentle. He told his son to be brave. After a couple of weeks, the father started getting worn down. Not angry, exactly, just exhausted. Sleep was already fragile in that house. Work was demanding, parenting was constant, and now every night ended with the same ritual, the same fear, the same small face staring at him like he was supposed to fix something he couldn't see. Then the complaints stopped. One morning the father asked cautiously if the boy had seen the clown again. The boy shook his head. No. The father felt relief so strong it almost made him laugh. He told himself it was over, that the phase had passed, that the boy had worked through it, that the checking routine had given his son confidence. For the first time in weeks, the father slept through the night without waking at a creak. A week later, the father sat in the living room after putting his son to bed. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet parents crave. He turned on the evening news, half listening while scrolling on his phone. Then he heard the headline, "A serial intruder arrested in a neighboring town." The father looked up because the anchor's tone had changed into that careful seriousness news people use when they know what they're saying will make viewers lock their doors. The report described a man who had been breaking into homes and living in them without the families knowing. Attics, crawl spaces, closets, anywhere he could hide. That detail made the father's stomach tighten, but it still felt like something that happens somewhere else. Then the anchor said the intruder had a habit. At night, he would come down from his hiding place. He would dress in a vintage clown costume, and he would stand in children's bedrooms watching them. The father felt the blood drain from his face so fast his hands went cold. The report showed the costume, the mask, old and cracked with faded paint and a smile that wasn't friendly, the kind of thing that would be terrifying even in daylight, even on a Halloween rack, because it felt like it belonged to someone who didn't understand joy. The only imitation. The police described the pattern. The man would stay in one house for a few weeks, then move on before he was caught. He would pick families, he would pick children, he would watch, he would leave. The father didn't hear much after that, his ears filled with a rushing sound. All he could think about was his son's face at the breakfast table, the steady, serious way he'd said it. The clown is watching me. The reason the boy had stopped seeing it wasn't because he got over his fear, it was because the clown had left. The father sat in the glow of the TV, feeling like the room had tilted. The most horrifying part wasn't even the idea that a stranger had been in the house. It was the idea that his son had tried to tell him in the only language a child has. Simple words, stubborn repetition, and the father had translated it into imagination because that was easier than believing a monster could be real. He went upstairs without turning the TV off. He climbed the steps too fast, heart pounding, and opened his son's door. The boy was asleep, face soft in the dim light, unaware of the storm in his father's chest. The father sat on the edge of the bed and put a hand on his son's back, feeling him breathe. He wanted to wake him and apologize for everything at once. But what would he even say? I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I left you alone with something I couldn't imagine. I'm sorry I did the checks like a bedtime story when maybe the danger was above us, quiet and patient. Instead, he stayed there, listening to the house the way he should have been, listening all along. Afterward, the father did what most people do once the world shows them how fragile their safety is. He checked every lock twice. He bought cameras. He installed motion lights. He sealed attic access points. He didn't sleep well for a long time. And even when nothing was found, no sleeping bag, no wrappers, no mask tucked into insulation, the feeling didn't go away. The feeling of having been wrong in a way that could have cost his child everything. Both stories leave you with the same sickness. Not fear of a ghost, not fear of the dark itself, fear of the ordinary, fear of the quiet hours when you assume you're alone. Because the terrifying truth in both is this: the house didn't feel like a crime scene. It felt like home. Meals were made, TV was watched, homework was done, toothbrushes sat in the bathroom like they always had, and all the while, the danger wasn't outside, looking in. It was inside, learning the shape of their lives. The smallest things become unbearable after you understand that. A floorboard creak doesn't sound like the house settling anymore. A shifted chair isn't just a child being careless. A missing snack isn't a mystery you laugh about. Even a child's fear, those wild little claims parents are trained to dismiss, starts to look different. Because sometimes kids aren't inventing monsters. Sometimes they're noticing them. And the worst part, the part that makes these stories stick under your skin, is not the dramatic endings. It's the weeks and months before, when the families were living right on top of the truth and arguing about plates and bedtime routines. It's the idea that the warning signs can look exactly like normal life. It makes you want to check the attic, yes. It makes you want to check the basement and the crawl space and the garage. But more than that, it makes you wonder about the last small thing you brushed off, the sound you ignored, the object you assumed you misplaced. The moment your child said they were scared, and you smiled and told them it was just a dream. Because sometimes when you hear something in the night, it isn't the wind. Sometimes it's someone getting comfortable. This happened when I was younger, back when my bedroom was in the basement. It wasn't one of those basements people picture when they hear the word. It wasn't a dirt floor cellar with cobwebs and dripping pipes. It was just the lower level of a normal family home. Drywall, carpet, a little bathroom, a short hallway that ended at the base of the stairs. It was finished enough that after a while, you stopped thinking of it as downstairs and started thinking of it as your space. That was how it felt to me. Private, quiet, mine. The basement was where I could shut my door and hear the world soften. Upstairs had the kitchen, the living room, the everyday noise. Downstairs had the steady hum of the furnace closet, the muffled thumps of someone walking overhead. And then, after that, silence. I liked it. I'd fall asleep down there without thinking twice. Every Sunday afternoon, we had a routine that never changed. My mom, my sister, and I would go to my grandma's house for dinner. It wasn't a casual thing. It was built into our week the way school mornings were built into Monday. We'd show up around the same time, eat around the same time, leave around the same time. It was predictable in a comforting way. Even the smell of my grandma's place felt predictable, like you could taste it before you walked through the door. My stepdad hunted on weekends. Duck hunting? Always duck hunting. He'd leave early in the morning, before most people were awake, and be gone all day. Sometimes he came back while the sun was still up. Sometimes he didn't show up until it was dark. Either way, Sundays belonged to my mom's side of the family. The house was usually quiet in the hours before we left, like it was taking a breath. On this particular Sunday, the routine shifted, but only slightly. My mom left before me, taking my sister with her. I told her I'd drive separately and meet them there. I don't even remember why I wanted to go later. Maybe I was finishing something. Maybe I didn't feel like going yet. Maybe I was being stubborn in that teenage way, where you want control over small things because you don't have control over big ones. Either way, it meant that for a little while, I'd be in the house alone with my dog. That didn't bother me. I'd been home alone plenty of times. The house was familiar. The day was normal. The light outside had that pale afternoon look you get when you know the sun is already lowering and the day is already on its way out. Nothing in my mind was leaning toward fear. I was in my basement room when my dog started barking. That was the first wrong thing. He almost never barked. He wasn't one of those dogs that yelps at every car door or loses his mind over a leaf blowing across the yard. If he barked, it meant something had truly caught his attention. Even then, he usually gave one or two warning barks and then quieted down to listen. This time it was short bursts at first, quick and sharp like a question he couldn't answer. At first, my brain did what it always does. It reached for the easiest explanation. Maybe my mom's car had pulled back into the driveway. Maybe she'd forgotten something and come home for it. Maybe my stepdad had returned early from hunting, even though that was less likely. My dog barked at familiar sounds sometimes, especially if he hadn't heard them all day. I called his name, expecting him to stop. He didn't. Instead, he moved into the hallway, barking again, his body stiff in a way that made me sit up straighter. His ears were pricked forward. His weight shifted from paw to paw, like he was ready to bolt. That level of alertness was rare for him, and it immediately made me more awake. I stepped out of my room and into the basement hallway. The space was narrow enough that you could stand at one end and see the other. On one side was the bathroom, on the other a storage room, and then the stairs up to the kitchen. My dog stayed close to my leg at first, still barking. Then he moved ahead of me toward the stairs as if he couldn't help himself. I followed, thinking I was about to see my mom at the top step, with a bag on her shoulder, rolling her eyes at the dog for making a fuss. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze, because I heard footsteps above me. Clear, unhurried footsteps on the main floor. Not the tick of pipes or the settling of wood. Not a random creak. Actual weight moving across the upstairs floor, slow and steady, like someone walking through the kitchen. In that moment, I still didn't panic. The sound was too ordinary for panic. Footsteps meant a person. A person meant my mom or my stepdad. I had no reason to imagine anyone else. My dog, though, reacted as if the sound was a threat. He bolted up the stairs so fast his nails scraped the steps. I heard him round the corner at the top and slide slightly on the kitchen floor. His barking changed immediately. It got louder, deeper, faster. Not the excited barking he used when someone he loved came home. This was defensive barking, the kind that says, "I don't like this, and I want you to know I don't like this." I took a few steps up after him, still trying to keep my thoughts calm. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft and close enough that it carried down the stairwell like breath. "Shh, shh, it's okay." I stopped so suddenly my foot hovered above the next step. My whole body went cold in a single wave, like someone had poured ice water into my chest. It wasn't my mom, it wasn't my stepdad, it wasn't anyone I recognized. The voice didn't sound like a neighbor calling for the dog. It didn't sound like someone laughing. It didn't sound like someone who belonged in our kitchen trying to soothe a pet. It sounded like someone speaking carefully, low and controlled, like they didn't want to be heard by anyone else in the house. My dog barked louder, more frantic, and the whisper came again, the same words, the same tone. "Shh, it's okay." Except it wasn't comforting, it wasn't gentle in a warm way. It felt like a person trying to quiet an alarm, like a person trying to hush something that was calling attention to them. That was the moment everything inside me snapped from confusion into survival. I didn't think through options. I didn't stop to wonder if I was mishearing it. My body reacted before my mind could argue. I spun around and ran back down the stairs. The basement suddenly felt like the only place with distance, the only place where I had a wall and a corner and a way to not be seen. My breath turned shallow and fast. I could hear my dogs barking above me echoing, and I could hear those slow footsteps shifting on the kitchen floor as if the person up there was moving. I darted into the storage room. It wasn't a dramatic room. It held old boxes, holiday decorations, cleaning supplies, a few things my stepdad kept for emergencies. Hidden away in there was a handgun. I knew where it was because adults never realize how much kids notice. I knew it existed. I knew it was considered for emergencies. I didn't know all the rules, not the way an adult should, but I knew one thing with perfect clarity. There was someone in the house who did not belong there, and my dog was trying to stop them. My hands shook as I grabbed it. Everything felt clumsy. My fingers felt too big. My palms were sweaty. My heart was pounding so hard it made my ears ring. I got myself into a position behind the storage room door, where I could see the hallway but stay partially hidden. I remember the feeling of waiting more than anything else. Waiting is where fear grows teeth. In those seconds, my brain filled in everything I hadn't seen. It pictured a stranger in our kitchen, standing between my dog and the stairs, whispering to quiet him. It pictured a hand reaching down to grab my dog's collar, or a foot swinging, or a sudden sharp sound that would cut the barking off. I listened for the dog to yelp. I listened for the sound of a struggle, but what I heard was worse in a different way. Footsteps again, heavy, slow, like someone pacing, then a pause, then another soft shift, like the person was deciding what to do next. Then silence. Not nothing happened. Silence. Not the normal quiet of an empty house. This silence felt intentional. It was the kind of quiet you hear when someone is trying to be quiet, when someone is holding still because they've realized you might be listening. My throat tightened so much, swallowing hurt. I held my breath without meaning to, as if breathing itself might be loud. Seconds passed, then more. My hands ached from gripping too hard. Sweat ran down my back even though the basement air was cool. My eyes watered, not from crying, but from not blinking. And then my dog came rushing back down the stairs. His nails clicked frantically on the steps. He slid at the bottom and skidded into the basement hallway, then stopped short when he saw me. His body was stiff. His sides were moving fast with heavy panting. His eyes were wide, and he looked shaken in the way only an animal can look shaken. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just rattled, as if what he'd encountered upstairs didn't fit into his understanding of the world. He didn't bark anymore. That was the scariest part. The barking had been brave in its own way. Barking was a warning. Barking was noise. Barking was a dog saying, "I am here and I see you." Now he was quiet. He stood beside me like he wanted to leave, like his instinct had shifted from defend to escape. I didn't wait another second. Whatever was upstairs, whoever was upstairs, had either moved away from the kitchen or gone somewhere I couldn't hear. I wasn't interested in finding out where. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a place that had been entered and the rules had changed. I moved fast, the way people move when they're trying not to think about what they're doing. I sprinted down the hallway, up the stairs, through the kitchen, straight into the garage. The main floor was brighter than the basement, but it didn't feel safer. It felt exposed, like open ground. I kept expecting to see someone at the end of the hallway, or standing in the doorway, or turning a corner. I expected a voice to speak again, close, calm, telling me to stop. Nothing. I didn't look around. I didn't search. I didn't call out. I grabbed my car keys and went straight to my car. I got inside, locked the doors, and started the engine with hands that barely worked. I didn't feel safe until I was down the street, turning corners, getting distance between me and that house. The whole drive to my grandma's place felt unreal. The roads looked normal. People drove past like it was just another Sunday. I kept checking my mirrors, not because I thought someone was following me, but because my body was still stuck in alert mode, still expecting the whisper to appear out of nowhere again. When I got to my grandma's house, the warm smell of cooking hit me as soon as I stepped inside. It should have calmed me. Instead, it made me feel like I was walking into a scene that didn't match what was happening inside my head. My mom was there, talking to my grandma, my sister sitting at the table with a drink. Everything looked safe, ordinary. I walked straight up to my mom and asked, "Did you come back home after you left?" She frowned, like the question didn't make sense. "No," she said immediately. "Why would I?" "You didn't forget anything?" I pressed. "You didn't stop back for a second?" "No," she said again, slower, studying my face now. "What happened?" I believed her instantly, not because she was my mom, but because there was no hesitation in her voice. She hadn't come back. My stepdad hadn't come back either. He was hunting. He always came home loud and obvious, and he definitely didn't whisper to a dog. So that left one option I didn't want to sit with. Someone had been in our house. For a long time, I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination, that I'd misheard, that maybe a neighbor had somehow wandered in and left before I reached the top of the stairs. That maybe the voice wasn't really a voice, just the TV upstairs left on low, just the wind pushing something in a way that sounded like speech. But the way my dog reacted ruined those explanations. He didn't do that for the wind. He didn't do that for a neighbor outside. He did that when something was in his space. Later, when we returned home together, My mom checked the doors with me. Front door locked, back door locked. The door between the garage and the house locked, the windows shut. No signs of forced entry, no broken latch, no open anything. Nothing that said, a person came in here. That should have made me feel better. It didn't, because if nobody could have gotten in, then what had I heard? I shoved the memory away because it didn't have a place to go. I didn't like thinking about it. The whispering voice stayed in my head like a splinter, but life moves on, and fear gets filed away when you don't want to face it. Weeks passed, then months, then almost a year, and then it happened again to someone else. My other grandparents came to visit for a week. It was the kind of visit that filled the house with talking, with bags unpacked, with meals cooked for more people. They were older, steady people. My grandpa in particular had a calmness to him that seemed unbreakable. He was the kind of man who didn't jump at noises. He didn't tell ghost stories. He didn't scare easily. He had lived long enough that small worries didn't stick to him. One Saturday morning, everyone went shopping at the mall except him. He stayed behind because he wanted to paint the family room in the basement. He liked staying busy. He liked fixing things. While we were all out, he worked with the radio on low, painting carefully, humming along like the house belonged to him. That part I didn't know at the time. I didn't find out until later that week when we were all sitting around watching TV. Some ghost show came on. One of those dramatic ones with fake night vision and people whispering into cameras. My stepdad laughed at it and made a joke about how ridiculous it was. Everyone laughed along. Then my stepdad turned and said, like it was a fun little fact, "You know your grandpa says he heard a ghost in our house once." I barely reacted at first. It sounded like a joke, a throwaway comment. Then he explained. He said that while my grandpa was down in the basement painting, the dog started barking upstairs. Not a normal bark, not an excited bark, the same frantic, confused barking. My grandpa turned the radio off to listen. He heard footsteps moving around on the main floor. He assumed we'd come home early. That was the logical explanation. Maybe someone forgot a wallet. Maybe someone needed the bathroom. Maybe my sister wanted something. He called out, but no one answered. The footsteps continued. The dog bolted, barking hard. The sound of his nails on the floor. And then my grandpa heard a voice speaking to the dog. Not loudly, not clearly, but definitely speaking. A quiet, soothing sound. The way a person talks to an animal to calm it down. My grandpa climbed the stairs expecting to see one of us. Expecting to see my mom standing in the kitchen. Expecting to see a bag dropped on the counter. But the kitchen was empty. The house was locked. No one had come back. My stepdad told it as if it was just a weird little coincidence. He shrugged and smiled, like the idea of a ghost was funny. But as he talked, the memory I'd buried slammed back into me so hard, it felt like getting punched in the chest. The barking, the footsteps, the voice speaking softly, the sense that someone was upstairs who wasn't supposed to be there. My grandpa had heard it too, and he hadn't known my story. I hadn't told it. I hadn't even hinted at it. Because I didn't want to talk about it, and because I didn't want anyone to look at me like I was dramatic. Two people at two different times heard the same thing. If it had been just me, I could have let myself believe it was fear or imagination. But my grandpa wasn't the type to invent a voice in an empty kitchen. He wasn't the type to get spooked and turn it into a story. He was practical, he was steady, and he was alone when it happened. That was the part that made it hard to breathe. Even years later, not the word ghost, not the idea of the supernatural, just the simple fact that something happened twice in the same pattern. I don't believe in ghosts. I never have. I don't believe in the supernatural in the way people do when they want the world to feel magical. I believe in locked doors and people and animals and bad coincidences. I believe in how fear can sharpen your senses. I believe in how a house can creak and fool you. But I can't explain what happened in that house. I can't explain the footsteps upstairs when nobody was home. I can't explain the whisper that didn't belong to any voice I knew. I can't explain the way my dog reacted like there was a real person right there in his space, close enough that he could smell them, close enough that he needed to defend. And I can't explain why my grandpa heard it too, without anyone feeding him the story or planting the idea in his head. Even now, telling it again for the first time in years, I can feel the same cold chill that ran through me on those basement stairs, the same instinctive awareness that something was wrong, long before I could prove it was wrong. Because imaginary things don't walk across floors, and imaginary things don't whisper to your dog. When I was 6 and my brother was 8, we shared a bedroom in a townhome in Arizona. It wasn't a big place. It was the kind of home where you could hear everything. Water running through pipes, footsteps upstairs, cabinet doors closing in the kitchen. Our bedroom had one shared wall with the neighbors, which meant their lives came through in small ways you didn't think about until you were lying in bed at night. A TV muffled through drywall, someone laughing, a dog's nails clicking on tile. At that age, everything felt larger than it really was. The hallway outside our door seemed longer at night. Shadows looked darker. Ordinary sounds could turn into something scary if you stared at the ceiling long enough. Most of the creepy things that happened in that room came from imagination. At least, that's what we told ourselves. That's what adults told us. Kids are good at making stories out of nothing. We had a friend, as we called it, that lived in the corner by the bedroom door. It was a corner that always seemed too dark even with the nightlight on. A spot where the ceiling angled weird and the carpet met the baseboard like it was hiding a secret. We decided together that a black widow lived there. It sounds ridiculous now, but to us it made perfect sense. Black widows were real. Arizona had them. We'd seen pictures. We'd heard adults talk about them like they were tiny monsters. We imagined ours was special, though, not just a spider, our friend. It only came out at night. It listened when we whispered. Sometimes in the half-light, we swore we saw something skitter along the baseboard, quick and dark, and our hearts would jump, and then we'd start giggling, because if we giggled, it meant we weren't scared. We talked to it like it could understand. We made up stories about what it did during the day, as if it clocked in somewhere and had spider co-workers and a spider boss. We joked about it having a spider family. We named it things and then changed the name and argued about what it liked to eat. It became part of our bedtime routine, the way kids use imagination to control what they can't control. And for a while, it worked. Then one night, something happened that had nothing to do with imagination. It was monsoon season. If you've lived through Arizona summers, you know the way storms can come in hard and loud, even if they don't last long. The wind can slam into doors like it's angry. Rain can hit windows like handfuls of gravel. The whole building can creak and shift under sudden pressure. Our mom would sometimes stand by the front window and watch the lightning, like she was trying to read the storm's mood. Most nights, though, she was tired. She worked. She was stressed. She was trying to keep things normal. That night, my brother and I were in bed, trying to fall asleep. The room was dark except for a small nightlight that threw a weak orange glow across the carpet. The air conditioner hummed in the background. Somewhere outside, wind moved through trees and made a low, rushing sound. We were half asleep when we first heard it, a bang against the shared wall. At first, it didn't alarm us. Monsoon season made the whole neighborhood noisy. Things fell, things rattled. Someone's trash can might tip over. We lay there listening, thinking it would stop on its own. But then it came again. Thump, and again. Thump, and again, steady and heavy. Like someone was hitting the wall with a fist or a tool. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the uneven rhythm of wind. It wasn't a branch tapping. It was deliberate. It was repeated with the same weight each time. It made the picture frame on our wall vibrate slightly. It made the air feel tense, like the room itself was bracing. My brother sat up first. I remember because the mattress shifted and the blanket slid a little, and suddenly I was wide awake. We looked at each other in the dim light. The same thought in both our faces. That's not weather. The banging continued. Not fast, not frenzied, just steady, insistent, almost angry. Our Black Widow corner suddenly didn't feel silly anymore. It felt like the room had always been waiting to turn on us, and now it had chosen a reason. We tried to wait it out. Kids do that. You lie still and hope the world fixes itself. But it didn't stop. It got louder. It moved, or at least it felt like it moved. From farther along the wall to somewhere closer to our beds, like whatever was hitting had shifted position. Finally, we screamed for our mom. The word mom came out raw, panicked, the kind of scream you only make when you're certain something is wrong. Footsteps came down the hallway. The door opened. Our mom stood there with her hair messy and her face pinched with exhaustion. She looked like she had just been pulled out of the kind of tired you don't bounce back from easily. "What?" she asked. And even at that age, I could hear that she was already carrying too much. We babbled over each other, pointing at the wall, telling her someone was banging on it, telling her it wasn't the storm, telling her it felt like it was right there, and the moment she stepped into the room, it stopped. Just silence. The sudden quiet made everything feel unreal. It's hard to explain how a noise can make you terrified, and then, when it stops, make you feel even worse. The absence becomes suspicious. It becomes like someone holding their breath. Our mom stood there for a second, listening, her shoulders tight. Then she sighed. Not an annoyed sigh exactly, more like a defeated one. "It's just the wind," she said. At the time, it sounded reasonable. The storms really were loud. Walls did creak. Things did bang. Adults always had explanations for sounds kids feared, and most of the time, those explanations were true. She told us to go back to bed. She said she'd check on us again soon. She kissed us goodnight, quick and distracted, and left. We didn't know what else had been going on in the house before she came to our room. We didn't know that she'd been in the living room dealing with something that had been hanging over her for months. We didn't know she'd finally decided that night to break up with her boyfriend because of his drug problem. We didn't know she'd been crying and trying to be strong and trying to pretend it wasn't tearing her apart. We just knew she had come in, listened, and told us we were fine. And for maybe a minute, we tried to believe it. Then, not 5 minutes after she walked out, the banging started again. This time, it wasn't subtle. It was louder, harder, like whoever was on the other side had waited for her to leave. Like the moment she left the room, whatever had been hitting decided it could start again. Thump, thump, thump. The wall seemed to tremble. My brother's eyes were wide, glassy in the nightlight. My own heart felt like it was trying to climb out of my chest. The sound felt closer now, like it had moved right beside our beds. Like the thing on the other side had come directly to where we lay. We screamed again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was real terror. It was the kind of scream that doesn't care who hears it. I leapt out of bed and ran. I didn't even think. I ran out of the room, down the hallway, into the living room, yelling for my mom like the word was the only rope I had. When I turned the corner, I stopped so hard I almost fell. My mom was standing in a defensive stance. Her fists were clenched. Tears were running down her face. She looked like someone who had been cornered. In front of her was her boyfriend. He was angry, breathing hard. His jaw was tight. His eyes looked wrong in that way they do when someone is full of something they can't control. He wasn't hitting her at that exact second, but the air between them was charged like a storm you can feel under your skin. There was no banging on our wall in that moment. There was only the tension, thick enough to choke on. I remember thinking, even at 6, that something in our home was breaking. He grunted something we couldn't understand. The words slurred or swallowed. So then he stormed out the front door. For a second, my mom didn't move, like her body hadn't caught up to what just happened. Then she snapped into motion, wiping her face quickly and stepping to the door. Outside, he got into his car and held down the horn. Not a quick honk, not an accident. A long, furious blast that ran on and on, vibrating through the night, loud enough to wake neighbors, loud enough to make the whole street feel like it was being screamed at. It was rage with nowhere to go, so he poured it into sound. When he finally drove off, my mom shut the door quickly. She locked it, then she slid the bolt, then she secured the chain. Her hands shook slightly as she did it, and I watched her the way kids watch adults when they're trying to figure out what safety actually looks like. She took a deep breath like she was forcing her body to keep working, and then she walked me back to the bedroom. My brother was sitting up in bed, the eyes still huge, his face pale. He said the banging stopped the moment I screamed and left the room. That part made sense to us at the time. We thought maybe it really had been connected to our mom's fight. Maybe the storm had shifted. Maybe the house had settled. My mom sat with us, her voice softer now. She stroked our hair. She told us we were safe. She stayed until our breathing slowed and our eyes finally drooped and we fell into a light, uneasy sleep. The house stayed quiet after that. The storm calmed too. I remember waking up once in the night, listening for the banging, expecting it to start again the way a nightmare restarts when you think it's over. But there was nothing. Morning came bright and ordinary, the way mornings always do after something bad. That's part of what makes fear so confusing. The world doesn't look different just because you felt like you might die the night before. Except that morning, something was different. Our mom woke us unusually early. She never did that unless something was wrong. She didn't sing our names or rub our backs the way she sometimes did on school days. She just called us into the living room, her face tight and serious. Her hands were shaking slightly as she sat us down. She didn't talk about her boyfriend. She didn't explain the argument. She didn't tell us anything about the horn or why she'd been crying. She focused on the front door. The doorknob was busted and hanging loose. The bolt lock was scraped and damaged like someone had tried to pry it open. Even the chain had fresh marks, little bright scratches that hadn't been there before. Outside, there were police officers, not 1 or 2, 6. Their dark uniforms stood out against the bright morning. They were talking to neighbors walking the sidewalk, looking at the ground like they were following invisible lines. Our mom told us our neighbors had been broken into during the night, and not like a quick smash and grab. Their whole house had been cleaned out. Electronics, decorations, clothes, food, everything. So much was gone that the place looked like a stage set after someone had stripped it for parts. Then she said the part that made my stomach twist. The burglars tried to get into our home too. They had worked on our door. They had fought with it. They had tried to force it. The only reason they didn't get inside was because my mom had locked it the way she did after her boyfriend left. Bolt, chain, everything. At least, that was what we thought until we went next door. We knew the neighbor kids. We played with them. We had eaten snacks in their kitchen, but they had been at their grandmother's that night, which was the only reason no one got hurt. Their house looked like it had been attacked. Cabinets emptied, drawers yanked out, furniture tipped, things thrown. It was chaos turned inside out, and everyone, police included, was avoiding the living room. Not avoiding it like they were busy elsewhere. Avoiding it like it contained something they didn't want to stand near. When we finally walked in, we saw why. The wall that connected their living room to our bedroom had a massive indent in it, a crater, about 6 feet across and nearly a foot deep. The drywall and whatever was behind it smashed inward like someone had been hammering the same spot over and over for hours. The edges were torn and rough. There was dust and debris on the floor. It looked less like a break-in and more like an attempt to tear through the building itself. My brother and I stared at it, and all I could think of was the sound in the night. The steady, heavy thumps, the way it felt like it moved along the wall, the way it got louder and closer. They hadn't been banging on our door. They had been trying to break through the wall. They had been hitting the wall that was connected to our room, the wall right beside where we slept. They didn't want to go through the front like normal burglars. Maybe they were desperate. Maybe they were stupid. Maybe they thought coming through the shared wall would be quieter, safer, less visible. Maybe they thought they could punch through drywall and slip into our place without setting off noise outside. They didn't know something important. Our unit had been added later. The shared wall wasn't built like the others. It wasn't just drywall, it was solid brick. So they had spent hours punching and smashing and chiseling at brick, getting nowhere, growing angrier and louder, trying different spots, trying to find a weakness that didn't exist. Now, if our home had been built like the other units, they might have gotten through. They might have stepped into our bedroom while we slept. They might have been standing right on the other side of that wall, listening to two children scream for their mom, and still kept going. One of the officers quietly told my mom that the burglars were likely still in the neighbor's house when we screamed. The noise might have scared them off, or at least disrupted them enough that they changed plans. He said it like a fact, but his eyes looked serious when he said it, like he didn't want to imagine what would have happened if the night had gone slightly differently. After that day, our mom never told us, "It's just the wind again." She always locked every door, every time. Bolt, chain, everything. She checked windows at night. She listened differently. She never brushed off a strange noise as nothing, not once. And my brother and I stopped calling the corner spider our friend. It didn't feel funny anymore. It felt like a child's way of trying to make fear manageable. And we had learned something too early, because that night taught all of us a lesson we didn't ask for, a lesson that stuck in our bones. Sometimes the sounds you hear in the dark aren't imagination. Sometimes there's someone trying to get in. When I was very young, my family lived on a street called Villa in Fresno, California. I was small enough that the world felt like it began and ended with our block. The street names mattered, the yards mattered, the way the sun hit the sidewalk in the afternoon mattered, and the house mattered most of all because a kid measures reality by the rooms they're allowed into and the places they're told not to go. The day we moved in, I decided the house was the greatest house in the universe for one simple reason. The previous owners had left something behind in the garage. Not furniture, not boxes, not old tools. They left a treasure, Castle Grayskull. It was the big one, the real one. The gray plastic fortress with the skull face, the drawbridge, the trap doors, the hinged walls. For a kid, it wasn't a toy, it was a whole world. I didn't care what the rest of the house looked like. I didn't care about the neighborhood. We could have been living on the moon for all I cared. If Castle Grayskull was in the garage, then we had moved into a palace. I dragged it out like it was a sacred object. I set it up wherever my parents would let me. I staged battles on the living room floor, in the hallway, under the kitchen table. He-Man fought Skeletor 100 different ways. I was happy. Loudly, completely happy. The kind of happy only a little kid can be when they find the exact thing they didn't even know they were hoping for. My sisters didn't share that feeling. They were older than me and they didn't care about plastic castles. What they cared about was the way the house felt at night. It started almost immediately after we moved in, which is why it stuck. New houses have noises. New houses creak. Adults always say that. But my sisters weren't talking about normal creaks. They weren't talking about a pipe knocking or a floorboard settling. They were talking about something walking. My oldest sister was the first one to complain. She had the bedroom under the attic space. It was one of those older houses where the attic stretched across the top of the whole building, a long, dark area you didn't really think about unless you needed to store Christmas decorations. Her bed sat beneath the slant of the roof, and above her was nothing but insulation, beams, and whatever else lived in the empty space between ceilings. At night, she swore she could hear footsteps up there, not the soft shuffle of something small, not the scurry of a rat. She described it as slow and deliberate, like someone pacing. Sometimes it went back and forth, sometimes it stopped directly above her bed, as if whatever was up there had chosen that spot to stand. And sometimes she heard scratching, not the faint sound of a tree branch against the siding, not a light rustle. She said it sounded like claws dragging along wood, long nails scraping as if something was testing the surface. She complained about it so often that it became a constant background argument in the house. She would tell my parents at breakfast, eyes dark from lack of sleep. She would bring it up in the afternoon, already tense about the coming night. Every evening she went to bed like she was bracing for something. My little sister heard things too sometimes, though not as often. She believed our older sister. She'd sit on the edge of her bed and listen. She'd whisper that she heard it too. She got scared easily, and once she had the idea in her head, she started hearing it even in the daytime, as if the attic was always awake. I didn't believe them. I thought they were trying to mess with me, or that they were scaring themselves. Kids imagine things at night. That's what adults said. That's what I told myself. And I was the youngest. I had Castle Grayskull. As I was busy, I didn't want their fear to take up space in my head. But my oldest sister was tired of being told she was lying. One afternoon, she snapped at me and said, if I thought she was making it up, I should sleep in her room for a night and see how funny it was. I took that as a challenge. I made a bet with her. Not a real bet with money because we were kids, but the kind of bet where pride is the only currency. I told her I'd sleep in her room, in her bed, and she could sleep in mine. When nothing happened to me, she'd have to admit she was exaggerating. She agreed immediately. That night, we switched rooms. I remember feeling smug, like I was about to prove a point. Her room felt slightly different than mine because it was closer to the front of the house, and the air always seemed a little warmer. Her bed was larger, and I lay down in it with my hands behind my head, staring at the ceiling, waiting. I listened for a long time. The house made normal sounds. The refrigerator cycled. A car passed somewhere far away. A dog barked outside once. The wind moved through the trees. I heard none of the dramatic pacing my sister described. No claws, no heavy footsteps. I waited until my eyes started to burn from staying open too long. Hours passed. Nothing happened. I started to feel victory settling in. I pictured myself telling her in the morning that it was all in her head. I pictured her rolling her eyes and pretending she didn't care, even though she'd be embarrassed. I drifted into sleep, feeling like the whole thing was a huge joke. Then, sometime in the early morning, while it was still dark, I jolted awake. At first, I didn't know why. My heart was racing the way it does when you wake up too fast. I lay still, trying to find the reason. I thought maybe I'd had a dream. Maybe I had to go to the bathroom. Maybe I heard a noise downstairs, then I heard it. Directly above my head. Footsteps. Heavy and uneven. Not a clean rhythm like an adult walking on a hallway floor. More like something with weight that didn't move smoothly. It clunked and shifted as if whatever was up there was stepping over beams or dragging itself across insulation. And beneath that, there was another sound. A dragging noise. A long scrape that ran across the wood and stopped. Then another scrape, as if something was pulling something behind it. Or as if it had long nails and they were catching the surface as it moved. The sound wasn't loud enough to wake the whole house, but it was loud enough that it felt impossible to ignore. It felt too close. It felt like the ceiling above me wasn't a ceiling at all, just a thin skin separating me from something that shouldn't be there. My confidence from the night before dissolved instantly. There was no room for smugness, no room for clever explanations. All I knew was my sister wasn't lying. I threw the blankets off and ran. I sprinted through the hallway barefoot, not caring if anyone yelled at me for making noise. I burst into my parents' room, gasping and shaking, words tumbling out in a messy panic. My mom sat up, startled. My dad grumbled and asked what was wrong. "I heard it," I managed to say. "I heard it in the attic." My parents exchanged that look adults exchange when they think a kid has had a bad dream. But I was crying. Not dramatic crying, but the kind where you can't stop shaking and your throat feels tight. My mom pulled me into their bed without arguing. My dad muttered something about raccoons. My mom told me to breathe and said I was safe. I didn't feel safe, not really. But the warmth of my parents' bed kept me from running out of the house entirely. After that, I never doubted my sisters again. Months passed. The attic noises continued, mostly for my oldest sister. She complained less after a while. Not because it stopped, but because she got tired of being brushed off. It became part of the house's personality, the way some houses are always drafty or always have a door that sticks. I tried to ignore it. I focused on being a kid, school, toys, Saturday morning cartoons, Castle Grayskull battles that lasted all afternoon. Then something happened that dragged all of us back into it. Our cat had kittens. It should have been purely happy. The kittens were tiny and warm and squeaky. They had closed eyes and soft fur. My sisters and I spent days sitting near the box, watching them wobble around, arguing over names we never stuck with. The whole house felt lighter for a while. One afternoon, we came home and heard a faint crying sound near the front of the house. At first, it sounded like one of the kittens had wandered off and gotten stuck somewhere. The sound was thin and desperate. Little mews repeated over and over. We followed it, searching along the hallway and checking corners until we found it. One kitten was pressed against an attic vent. Its tiny face was pushed close to the metal screen, and it was crying loudly as if it was terrified. Its little paws scrabbled at the vent cover, but it couldn't get through. The vent came from the attic. My mom called my dad, and he came into the hallway with that irritated expression adults get when they don't want to deal with a problem but have to anyway. He looked at the kitten, then looked up at the ceiling like he could see through it. The attic entrance was in my oldest sister's closet, of course. That detail still feels cruel in hindsight, like the house had chosen her room on purpose. My dad dragged a chair from the kitchen into her room and shoved it into the closet. He opened the attic hatch, and the dark hole above the closet seemed to swallow the light. He tried to climb in himself, but he was too big. His shoulders wouldn't fit. He cursed under his breath, wriggled, tried again, then backed out. Then he looked at me. I was small enough. That meant the job fell to me. He handed me a lighter, not a flashlight because we didn't have one handy, and he was the kind of dad who thought a lighter was good enough for anything. "Just reach in," he said. "Grab the kitten. Come right back out." His voice made it sound simple, like reaching into a cupboard. He steadied the chair as I climbed up. I stepped onto the high shelf in the closet, my hands shaking, my stomach tight. The attic opening was above my head. When I pushed my head and shoulders into it, the air changed immediately. Up there it was stale, warm in a trapped way. It smelled like dust and old wood and insulation. The lighter flame flickered, the tiny light making the darkness feel even deeper around it. Shadows jumped along beams and the slope of the roof. I could see the kitten farther away, near the vent. It was a small, pale shape against the darker floor. It was still crying. I called to it softly, reaching my hand out. "Come here," I whispered, like the kitten could understand. "It's okay." It trembled and backed away from me, frightened by my movement and the flame. I scooted forward carefully on my belly, trying not to think about what was beneath me. The attic floor was a narrow set of boards. The space felt tighter the farther I went. I kept whispering to the kitten, coaxing it slowly. Each time it hesitated, I stopped. I didn't want to chase it and make it run deeper into the attic. After a few minutes, it finally crept close enough for me to grab it. I wrapped my hand gently around its middle, careful not to squeeze too hard. It squeaked once, then went still, tiny body vibrating with fear. I turned to crawl back. Without thinking, I shifted my body to sit on the shelf behind me, the part of the attic that connected to the space above my sister's room. It was just a small adjustment, a simple movement that changed my angle. That was when I saw it. Right in front of me, close enough that it felt like my nose almost touched it, was a large creature. The closest thing I can compare it to is a dog. But it wasn't a normal dog. It was too big, too thick in the shoulders, and its face looked wrong. Its muzzle was shaped oddly, too long or too blunt, like it didn't belong. Its eyes were fixed on mine with a flat, unblinking stare. It was hunched forward, as if it had been crawling through the attic darkness, and stopped only when it reached me. Its fur looked coarse and matted, clumped in places like it had been wet and dried without being brushed. The shape of its body seemed twisted slightly, not in a broken way, but in a way that made my brain struggle to categorize it as a normal animal. And the worst part was that it wasn't moving. It didn't breathe. It didn't blink. It didn't make a single sound. It just stared. For a second, my mind did something strange. It tried to pretend I wasn't seeing what I was seeing. It tried to make it into a shadow, into a pile of insulation, into a shape the lighter was creating. But it was too close, too solid. Fear hit me like a wave, not the kind of fear you feel watching a scary movie. This was primal. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere older than thought. My body went cold. Every muscle locked up. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I dropped the kitten, not because I wanted to, because my hands stopped working. The kitten slipped out of my grip and fell back through the opening, yowling as it tumbled down into the closet. I heard my mom gasp below. I heard my dad swear. I shoved myself backward without thinking, my feet scrabbling for the shelf. I lost my balance. The lighter flame went sideways. The world spun. I fell out of the attic. I hit the closet floor hard. Pain exploding in my shoulder. I didn't stop. I didn't even look to see if I was bleeding. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Behind me, from inside the attic, came a heavy crash. Loud, violent, like something with weight had slammed into the boards. That sound chased me down the hallway. I ran straight out the front door, barefoot. The cold concrete hit my feet like a slap. I didn't care. I kept going until I reached the lawn, shaking, crying, breathing in short bursts. I refused to go back inside. Not that day, not the next day, not for 2 full weeks. My grandmother lived in an apartment, and my mom eventually took me there because she couldn't get me to stop trembling every time someone mentioned the attic. I slept on my grandma's couch. I watched TV too loud. I refused to talk about it for long because the moment I tried, my throat would close up. No one believed me except my sisters. My dad went into the attic himself later with a flashlight. He's searching every corner. He found nothing. No animal, no prints, no torn insulation, no droppings, nothing. He said I must have imagined it. He said I'd scared myself and then made it into a story. But my sisters believed me. They had heard it for months. They had lived under it. They knew the house did things. Eventually, I went back. Kids adapt. Fear gets pushed into the background when life keeps moving. The attic noises continued for a while, but after what I'd seen, none of us talked about them with the same casual annoyance. Even my dad stopped joking about raccoons. He would go quiet when my oldest sister said she heard it. He would look toward the ceiling and then look away. Months later, the night that erased any doubt came. My mom, my sisters, and I went out shopping. It wasn't anything special, just errands. My dad stayed home. He'd been drinking. That part wasn't new. It was something we all knew how to measure and predict. The way he got louder. The way his movements got careless. When we left, he was on the couch with a movie on, beer nearby. Later, he admitted he'd been sitting there cleaning and loading his handgun. Even now, I can feel my stomach tighten, typing that in my head. Because it's the kind of detail you only understand fully once you're older. At the time, guns were just part of the house in the way dangerous things sometimes are. You learn to live around them. You learn the rules. You don't question the adults. So, according to him, the gun went off by accident. The shot punched upward into the ceiling. He told us the moment it fired, he heard something. Not the echo of the gunshot, not the ringing in his ears. Something else. A sound from above. A half screech, half howl, like an animal in sudden pain, raw and furious. Then came a heavy crash from my sister's room. Before he could even process it, he saw something burst through the hallway. A brown, dog-like creature ran full speed toward him. It wasn't a normal dog. It was too big, too fast, moving with a wildness that didn't match the shape of a pet. It didn't hesitate. It didn't stop to look at him. It sprinted through the living room like it had one purpose: to get out. The front door was open because my dad had left it that way, letting air in and out as he smoked earlier. The creature shot straight through the doorway and vanished into the street. My dad sat there shaking, gun still in his hand, breath coming hard. He didn't chase it. He didn't shout. For once, he wasn't laughing at anything. When we came home, he told us the story immediately. His face was pale. His voice had that tight edge that meant he wasn't exaggerating. He sounded scared, and that alone changed everything. We didn't have to rely only on his words. In my sister's closet, the attic entrance was broken outward. The wood around it was cracked and splintered like something had forced itself out from above with violent strength. Deep scratch marks gouged the walls and the trim. The closet looked like a fight had happened in a space too small for one. Neighbors told us they saw something run out of our house. A weird brown animal moving faster than any dog they'd ever seen. Someone described it as wrong, which is a useless word until you've seen something yourself and realize it's the only one that fits. After that night, the attic went quiet. No more footsteps, no more scratching, no more dragging sounds above my sister's bed. The house settled back into its normal creaks and pops, the kind of harmless noises adults always point to when kids get scared. My oldest sister slept better. My little sister stopped whispering about sounds. But none of us ever forgot, because the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like something leaving, like something had been there, had stayed as long as it wanted, and then had finally been forced out. And even now, years later, when I think of that house on Villa in Fresno, the first thing I picture isn't the bedrooms or the kitchen or the backyard. It's the garage, with Castle Grayskull sitting there like a gift, like a promise. And above it all, the attic, a dark space that shouldn't have held anything at all, but did.